And welcome to the 2021 AFP Advancement Northwest Annual Conference. My name is Lauren Dupree, and I use she, her pronouns, and I'm excited to be back again this year as the MC. I have brown skin, I'm standing in front of a teal wall, and I have a black floral dress on with a high ponytail. We're encouraging our presenters to provide visual descriptions of themselves, as I've just done for blind or low vision attendees. We are excited that you are here today. We have a full day planned with great content, conversation, and learning. Before we begin, we want to offer our gratitude to the conference sponsors. During our networking times, you can visit their sponsor banners at the bottom of the page. Our program sponsors are UW Foundation, Campbell & Company, United Way of King County. Our event sponsors are the Alford Group, Columbia Bank, Bloomerang, and Washington State Convention Center. Our exhibitor sponsors are Crescendo, CFRE, Proactive Content, Little Green Light, Voltas, Breakthrough Fundraising Group, Insight Consulting, Gladiator Consulting, and UW Continuum College. And event sponsor, Synchronicity Events, who provided the welcome kits you received in the mail. If you're having any tech troubles today, please be sure to visit the Synchronicity team down at the tech table on the first floor. They can also show you some helpful Remo hints for navigating the space, including how to zoom in and out of the map and how to update your profile. We've shared a link in the chat to today's agenda, which you also received via email in the last few days. There are breaks built into the day, but please remember to take breaks whenever you need to. If you need to step away during the networking times, simply turn off your camera and microphone. They will automatically turn off during the sessions. You can also join one of the tables marked Quiet Table if you need to take a break. During the networking breaks, be sure to have your Meet Someone Who card handy as you meet new friends and colleagues. If you complete your card during the day, submit it to Brittany London at Brittany, BRITNI, at aminc.org to be entered to win free admission to next year's conference. We'll pull 2 winners at the end of today. I also want to remind you of the closed captioning stream available throughout all of our sessions today. The link is in the chat for anyone who would like to view the closed captions. And now, to help me kick things off, please welcome AFP Advancement Northwest President, Daniel Webb. Daniel is a champion for education equity and a long-standing believer in the power of fundraisers to support community impact through philanthropy. He joined the Northwest Development Officers Association Board in 2014 and was part of the inaugural board for AFP Advancement Northwest a year later. Daniel served as a philanthropy officer at the University of Washington for many years before joining City Year Seattle, King County in 2019 to lead a development team in support of education equity for Seattle students. Welcome, Daniel.
Thank you, Lauren, and thank you so much for joining us again at the conference this year.
Thanks for having me back.
Yeah. Welcome, everyone, to the AFP Advancement Northwest Annual Conference. We're so excited here, and I'm looking forward to learning with you and from you over the 2 days we have together. My name is Daniel Webb. I use he, him pronouns. I have white skin, brown hair, green eyes. I'm wearing a red shirt. I'm sitting in front of a wall with a multicolored mountain mural that my niece painted for my 8-week-old office mate. I proudly serve as the president of the board for AFP Advancement Northwest. To start our time together today, it's important for us to respectfully acknowledge that we are gathering here, or many of us are, in King County, on land that has been occupied and taken from the Coast Salish people, including the Duwamish, Muckleshoot, Puyallup, Tulalip, Snoqualmie, and Suquamish, who have been and continue to be the stewards of this land throughout the generations. Let's also acknowledge that the Duwamish people are still fighting for federal recognition as a tribe. Please join me in a moment of silent acknowledgement and gratitude to the land we're on today and the past and present Native Indigenous people that steward this land. I encourage you to take the time to look up whose tribal lands you occupy by using the tool in your Know Before You Go email or visiting the link that was just dropped in the chat. Our Advancement Northwest chapter of AFP is intentionally on a journey to rethink our role as a professional association and work towards being an anti-racist organization. We believe our role is to break down historic barriers to entry, build a welcoming and accessible platform for fundraisers of all identities to convene and grow together, and to lift up the experts in our fundraising community who are pushing us forward. This work is not easy. One challenging aspect of our journey is recognizing and acknowledging that we, AFP Advancement Northwest, don't have a great track record of supporting and listening to Black, Indigenous, and people of color in fundraising, even when they're our coworkers, neighbors, friends, and family. In fact, the sector has systematically ignored input from or actively retaliated against BIPOC folks who call attention to racism and enact change. We developed this conference to intentionally recognize the work of and lift up the voices of BIPOC fundraisers and social impact leaders who have not been asked to share their stories and wisdom before. I encourage you all to actively listen throughout these 2 days we have together, to intentionally ask yourself, why have I been doing it this way before? And open your minds up to new ways of thinking about and doing our work. AFP has a long way to go as an organization to live into our values of diversity, equity, inclusion, and access. This is always work for us as people and for us as an organization, and it takes a village to move this work forward. I encourage you to consider getting involved with AFP, whether that's considering board service, volunteering on a committee like this conference committee that built this conference, or starting to more regularly join our free or low-cost community convening events. We need your voices and your ideas to continue moving this work forward. If you'd like to learn more, please visit our website or reach out to any of the board members you interact with during the event. I want to thank a few folks before we dive in. First, a huge thank you to all of our speakers and presenters who we'll have the opportunity to learn from during this conference. I'd also like to give a huge thanks to our conference co-chairs, Catherine Merlot and Nick Payton, and committee members, Kiata Marshall, Libby Singer, Lillian Ballesteros, and Kate Neville. They worked tirelessly to put this conference together and were extremely intentional about how we built this program, how we decided whose voices we lift up over the 2 days we have together, and how we're hopefully creating a welcoming and inclusive space for us all to learn together. And again, to all of you out there, I commend you for making the choice to be with us today. You have many options when it comes to professional development, and you chose intentionally to join a community of more than 400 philanthropy professionals for 2 days as we enter a journey together to listen to new voices and reimagine our work. I'd like to next welcome Dan Peterson, Vice President for Development and President of the UW Foundation at the University of Washington. Dan has been a mentor of mine from my time at UW and a great champion for supporting fundraisers across our region. Dan, thank you and welcome.
Thank you, Daniel and Dan. And now to introduce our keynote speaker, please help me welcome Sarah Anderson of Campbell & Company. Take it away, Sarah. Thank you, Sarah and Thomasina. We are very excited to have Edgar Villanueva and Nina Yarborough with us this morning for the keynote presentation on the Decolonizing Wealth Project. Edgar and Nina, will you join me on stage? Hello, welcome.
Hi.
Hi. Good
Hello.
morning.
Thank you so much for joining me. Before you two get started, would you please introduce yourselves with your pronouns and a visual description of yourself?
Sure. My name is Nina Yarborough. I use she, her pronouns. I am a brown skin, plus size woman in my apartment. I am wearing a green floral top with a short afro and red lips, and I am excited to be here.
Hi, everyone. I'm Edgar Villanueva. My pronouns are he, him. I am calling in from my apartment in New York City. This is unceded territory of the Lenape tribe. I am a light skinned Native American with short dark hair and facial hair, and I'm wearing a blue dress shirt.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And I just want to call out Nina. Someone said, don't ignore that gorgeous necklace. So you might want to describe that.
So I am wearing a gift from a dear friend's mom. It is a golden spider and a golden choker, because we need a beat face when we're at a conference, friends.
Wonderful. Okay, well, I will leave you to it, and I'll be back after the Q&A. So I'll see you soon.
Thank you, Lauren. First of all, shout out to Miss Lauren Dupree. If you do not know Lauren, she is an amazing actor, writer, musical artist, and I'm going to put her on Front Street because she does have an amazing film project called Atopic that is currently coming out. So please look up Lauren. She's amazing. Support Black artists, support artists of color. Edgar, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. I'm fantastic. How are you, Nina?
I'm doing pretty good. The sun is shining in Seattle, so I am grateful. And my skin is glowing right now, so I'm feeling pretty confident. So
Nice.
And you're glowing too. So thank you so much for joining us this year. I know that you could have been a lot of places, and there is a lot of demand for your time. So we are grateful to have you back in Seattle. This is not your first rodeo here. And so in our conversation, we talked a lot in preparing for this, how we really wanted to center BIPOC folks in this conversation. So this is, call it your forewarning, call it your preview, is that everybody will benefit from this conversation and hearing what you have to say, but this conversation is for and about and centering the needs of BIPOC folks, those most impacted by systems of systemic oppression, racism, all the isms, and everybody else will benefit. So I just wanted to give folks a heads up right now, because that's the conversation we're about to get into. So to kick us off, could you, in this first part of the conversation, talking about dismantling white supremacy within our sectors, fundraisers, can you just talk to us, for people who don't know what the Decolonizing Wealth Project is? Can you just talk to us? What is that about? Why did you start it? What are you hoping to accomplish with it?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, always so happy to be back in Seattle, although virtually right now, but thanks for having me. As it was shared in the intro, I wrote a book in 2018 called Decolonizing Wealth. And for me, this book is really the story of my experience being an Indigenous person, a queer person, someone from the South, who found themselves working inside of institutional philanthropy 16 years ago. And all of the interesting things that happen along my journey, some fantastic things, but also some situations that were quite painful, to be in this space trying to do good work in a place that was not meant for me or built for me, or even created to serve and support my way of leading and being. And through the years, my approach to healing my own wounds from working in the space, I shared my story and stories from folks who had a shared experience: women, queer folks, people of color, you name it, people with disabilities, who have felt marginalized. We're often invited into this space because of the communities we represent, but then once you're on the inside, there's a forced assimilation that begins to happen that really is quite oppressive. And I felt it as after more than a decade of doing this work, I just began to ask myself, what am I going to do about it? I got really tired of having the same conversations about equity over and over again at all of the philanthropy conferences. And I saw within the field, we invested hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in diversity studies. And we were actually seeing a decrease in the number of people of color, Black and Indigenous, that worked in philanthropy. So I was like, what is really going on? We need to get real about the conversation. And so I wrote the book, and I honestly, Nina, had no idea what would happen. I sort of imagined that I would be blacklisted from ever working at a foundation again. And but for me, writing it was my was an act of obedience to my ancestors and just something that I needed to get out. And I moved from a place of being sort of disgruntled and wanting to just, complain and criticize philanthropy to a place of let me actually share my healing and how I have been coping with this, that not only has been my salvation, but is the way forward. If we're going to do this work, we've got to do it through that lens of healing and repair. And so since then, I did launch an organization and a fund. Decolonizing Wealth Project is our organization. Our fund is Liberated Capital. And ultimately, we exist to disrupt the flow of capital through communities and change where it's going and change who controls that wealth.
And thank you so much for sharing that. And you said something about like the obedience to my ancestors. Like, Edgar, stop flirting with me, okay? Like, that the connection that you have to your ancestors, your culture, your people plays such a huge role in your work. And I feel like in our field, because of assimilation that has happened to all of us for centuries, we are taught to divorce ourselves from that very real, call it emotional, spiritual part of ourselves. So thank you for calling that out. I am making my way through Decolonizing Wealth. I am one of those people that's been living under a rock and has not read it, but she's making her way through, getting her homework done. But one of the things that I did appreciate is you talking about your story, starting at the foundation as a young 20-something, and then I'm seeing the collected stories. Can you talk to us a little bit about what were some of those formative experiences for you as an Indigenous person that made you realize oh, something is not right? Like this sector that I'm in, something doesn't feel right. You obviously talk about it in the book, but are there any particular stories you want to share for folks who may not be familiar with it?
Sure. My entire life I've lived in sort of a place of being otherized, in so many ways, because when you have been in this country, you're automatically put in a box where that is constantly under threat, right? We're the only race or ethnicity that has to prove to the federal government that we are who we say we are. And when I was a young child, my mom took me and we moved away from our community to the city so I can go to better schools. So from very early on, I have been, in this place of sort of forced assimilation to dominant culture out of a place of survival. When I got into philanthropy, it was accelerated in so many ways because I went to work at a sort of a legacy foundation, old money, old tobacco money from the South. And, at first, everything really, I was getting paid more than I ever got paid. And there were a lot of perks and automatic power and privilege that I inherited just in lieu of taking on this job. And, when you've never had that kind of stuff, it feels a little good,
Right.
And so, I had resources. I bought my first home. But at a certain point in time, I began to just see and understand that something was a little off, because the mission of the foundation, which was very explicit about supporting poor communities in North Carolina, which obviously were the counties in the state that had majority people of color populations. And if you know anything about North Carolina, we have many counties that are predominantly Black, some counties that are with high numbers of Native American populations. We weren't moving money into those counties. If we were moving money into those geographies, they were to very large institutional healthcare systems, universities. And so I thought I was just doing my job when I said, well, this is our mission. I have jurisdiction at some level over these resources. Let me get the money to where I see people doing this work that, and bringing in my public health training and the socioeconomic determinants of health. I was trying to move money to new groups and to groups led by Black folks, Native folks, other people. And there was so much resistance to that. And that's where I learned that the language and the positions that often we take on in this industry are actually just very coded or almost explicit racism. When we say that certain groups don't have capacity, when we say they don't have a track record, when we say, oh, let's wait and see, like we got to get, you know, we're not sure, or we've never funded those folks before, that those are all racist. That's all like super like racist kind of ways of thinking and being that are just steeped in historical and systemic that continue to marginalize our communities from having resources. And so this is where I felt the tension. One day in particular, I'll never forget, I was at a board meeting, and mind you, I was in my younger age a little bit of a rule follower. I tried to fit in. I wasn't walking into board meetings like with my fist in the air, like push, I really was like trying to manage up and make a case and translate it in a way that coincided with their interests, right? And I remember getting shot down when I was trying to make the case to fund a particular organization. I felt very passionate that we needed to give the money to this group who was doing amazing work. And I was just getting the pushback all the way around. Oh, like bring it back next cycle. Let's do some more, like, well, let's wait, And I was like, why is this happening? Like, why can't we fund this group? And again, I was remaining calm. I was speaking the right, language and tone, the code switching that we all know about. And at a certain point in time, the president of that institution kind of shut it down completely and said, Edgar, you're getting too big for your britches. Now, for you folks not from the South, which is probably a lot of you all, what does that mean? That's not a very nice thing to say where I come from. It's basically, it means the same thing as like, you need to know your place. You need to put your head down. You need to fall in line. And I realized at that point in time that I was just brought in to check a box and to get in line and just fun and do what we had always done with making. And that began a process for me of really just being a little bit disillusioned. Like, is this place even for me? Is there a way that I can actually make an impact working in and around wealth? Because folks here do not want to change or rock the status quo that is built to serve their needs.
Wow. And I feel like that is such the norm, right? Is that you have these large institutions founded on blood money. Like, let's be very clear about what it is. And I feel like that's another part of the conversation that people have to reckon with, is that when you have centuries of profit off of the land of stolen people, tilled and worked by stolen people, like, it's blood money, and you can't divorce those two things. And to hear you talk about this, like, it's resonating with me so much, and it's also echoing many conversations that I've heard from other fundraisers of color that have tried to insert themselves into the system, essentially be like, well, it's hard to fight from the outside, let me get on the inside. And
Right.
Then it's sort of the reality of like, oh, I'm window dressing. Like, I'm here to make you feel good about yourself. And the big and the britch is like, my mom's side of the family is from Alabama. So I guess the Black equivalent is like, you getting a bit too uppity. Like,
Exactly.
I need you to come on down. So keep in line with this idea of like, so you're moving in these systems of like just blatant white supremacy, this old money that does like it's trying to accomplish something that is of good, right? Like the idea of funneling money into communities that need it because of all of the ways that our economy is structured, like it's good on paper. But what for you was the moment in your career where you made an active choice to no longer be, I guess, part of the system, if that makes sense? Like because you spoke to us about that recognition, but when was the moment where you're like, no, and what did that manifest as Decolonizing Wealth Project, or was it something before that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually don't know. In many ways, I probably am still a part of the system, and I have worked inside philanthropic institutions for 16 years. I currently still work at a foundation. I'm in the process of transitioning out to be full-time with DWP. And it's really interesting because I, have straddled this position, and I talk about it a little bit in my book around where do I land on, do we, burn this system down to create a new system, or do we approach this through incremental change? It's really fascinating because, of course, when you talk to people, especially people of color, you're going to find perspectives across that continuum. I have found for me that my best contribution to change is actually to be inside the belly of the beast and to be a disruptor there. And at times being inside of the institutions and making that change is something that folks in community may not understand. And I totally get that, because this system and these organizations have harmed communities. They have caused trauma. But my calling has been to be on the inside, to disrupt and to change from within in an incremental way. And for a lot of people of color, it's hard sometimes to imagine burning down the system when it's the only thing that you've got, right? And I describe it in the book for me as kind of sitting on this like raggedy boat, but holding on to it because there's no other boat right now. And so there is a fear and a trauma of letting go, right? That's a real situation. And I talked to plenty of like radical white folks who are like, burn it down. And I'm like, because they know they're going to be okay on the other side. Right. I've got trauma. So I'm trying to hold on. So what I'm doing inside of philanthropy is absolutely in deep solidarity and in alignment with folks, social movements, from the outside for change, for economic justice. It's a different path, but we're rowing in the same direction. I've made a decision to step out of sort of the institutional foundation world to launch my own fund, but we're all inherently kind of connected to capitalism and philanthropy, because I am dependent on donations and foundations to support this work. Now, the best I can do to get to the most decolonized type of fund possible is to, I've set this fund up with a reparations framework where we accept this money, but we don't accept your power. We don't accept your agendas. We take contributions, but our donors zero say so over anything around how we use this money. We don't fund, we're issue agnostic. We don't, comply to geographic restrictions by funders. If you want to participate in Liberated Capital, it is a place where you give up your money and you give up your power. And then we redistribute that wealth in a way that is under the advisement, 100% advisement of Indigenous, Black, and people of color. So it is, literally redistributing wealth and decolonizing wealth, because it's not the wealth that we are against. It's the power over the wealth and how wealth is used that we're trying to change. And, we're trying to build wealth in our own communities. And we can only do that if wealth is redistributed, where white folks and institutions with money actually hand over their money to us so that we can use those resources in a self-determined way. So I think I work in and out and all around the system in different ways, depending on what day it is.
We all have our inroads into the work. And I would say, in light of the pandemic, it is the proverbial elephant in the room, right? Like, I don't think anything could have stopped us the way that this pandemic has. Like, I would never wish the grief and the loss and the economic devastation that is far more impacted folks of color, anybody that lives in a marginalized intersection. But we've been screaming out for something. People have not been paying attention to the murdered Black bodies. They have not been paying attention to the droves of missing Native women and girls. They have not been paying attention to the disproportionate number of violence acted against trans individuals, trans Black women. And so without the pandemic, a lot of us who were on the fence around, like, how do I actually engage with this work? Because I'll say for myself, that's what happened. I'm not somebody that shows up on the march. One, I don't like people, large groups of people, and two, I have asthma, and I would like to see my 40th birthday. But also recognizing we all have our own path to walk. And so I think it is refreshing, and people need to understand that, like, the way that I accomplish this work may not be how you accomplish this work, but what you just said, we're all rowing in the same direction, I think is beautiful. So thinking about I think the big question that a lot of us BIPOC fundraisers, people who are in it, are like, we know the system isn't working, like we're craving for something else. That's why I don't know how much of the CCF, the community-centric fundraising movement, you've been paying attention to or gotten a chat about, but clearly people want something different. And I know that AFP is figuring out how do we have these conversations. When you think about the antidotes to white supremacy, like how do we actively, you've mentioned a couple of things, right? It's like one, knowing and just paying attention, right? Understanding that you are in this system that is not set up for you as a BIPOC person to survive. What are other antidotes that you see in our to dismantling or decolonizing the system of philanthropy, that distribution of wealth? Is there anything else that really gets you fired up or really excited?
Yeah, you know what I'm so excited about right now is, I've been talking about using the framework of reparations within philanthropy now for a couple of years, and it's really beginning to stick. And what I mean by that is like helping foundations, people with wealth, donors to understand the origins of this wealth, right? And because everyone's rolling out a DEI plan, and when we think about DEI, that's like forward looking, right? That's like, oh, from now on, we're going to be good. We're going to change this in the future. We're going to get more diverse. But what about the work that, what about what you've been doing and the harm? It's so to get to a place of equity, we have got to also think about what we need to do to repair. And so I've been advising and working with some foundations who are really taking deep dives into the origin of their wealth, to understand where did this money come from and what obligation do we have to get this money back and to repair the harm that's been done. Some of you may have seen that the Bush Foundation in St. Paul recently made an announcement that they're going to pay $100 million in reparations to Black and Native folks in their region. And this is a direct result of conversations that I've had with our organization around decolonizing wealth, like understanding that you are a institution that has benefited from the accumulated advantages of being a rich white institution, while the communities that you aim to serve have been marginalized and have have suffered from the accumulated disadvantages of being people of color inside systems and policies that have been explicit about keeping us in poverty. And so all of that being said, not only has the Bush Foundation, they've been funding people of color, but it said, we need to do something deeper. We need to dig into the wealth part, because, grants are just a sprinkling of the dollars that foundations actually hold, right? It's a small percentage, usually around 5%. What I'm going for is that 95%. I want to decolonize the endowments of these institutions, and to not only divest from harmful and extractive industries, but to also just to give that money to communities of color, right? Give us those resources to actually have our own philanthropic infrastructure to fund our communities in our own way. So I'm excited about what I see with Bush Foundation. I'm excited about the donors and folks who are coming to be a part of the Liberated Capital community, who are just saying, you know what, I'm signing over my donor advice fund to you all. You all just take all the money and you all make all the decisions. That's the type of radical giving that we need to have. We've got to move beyond diversity. Diversity was so 10 years ago, and we don't have parity yet, but we need to keep working on it. But we've got to get to equity. And equity, y'all know, is not equality. Equity actually means we have to privilege and center and overfund and give away our wealth to people of color so that we have the opportunity to catch up and share the wealth. So that's the radical place where I am kind of thinking and doing work now. I'm thinking about land redistribution. I'm thinking about how corporations can give equity in their companies to people of color. I want to really dig into wealth, and that's why our fund is called Liberated Capital, because we're here it's going to be take some donations and redistribute that. We do that, but we're going for something much more transformative and more serious dollars and assets. It's the only way we're going to close the race wealth gap, is to throw amounts of capital color. We're not going to get there from being polite, from having a special initiative to make a handful of grants to people of color, to make some diversity hires in our institution. We've got to go deeper, faster, harder at getting money redistributed to communities of color, and serious money, like serious wealth.
Yes. And I do want to acknowledge that there is a lot of activity in the chat. I want to let you know that I do see it. We are going to have some time towards the end for questions, but I also, in working with Edgar to kind of figure out how we wanted to do this, I did specifically source a couple questions from BIPOC fundraisers, because at my organization, we have a facilitation model that is the first and the last question will come from, in our case, Black folks, but in this case, general BIPOC folks. So when we get there, I will kick us off with those questions because I was able to get permission from the folks to share. But just in the chat, I'm seeing just lots of activity, and there are a few questions in the Q&A that we will try and get to as well. I see there was one specifically related to DAFs that was upvoted quite a bit. But yeah, just want to let folks know we will get there. So one of the areas that pops out to me, and I'm just going to check time. I'm trying to keep time, make sure. Okay, so we still doing good. All right, we got this. Because we got to keep these virtual experiences popping, fresh, cute, but people got things to do and they need to mingle and meet each other. So this idea of leadership, right? There was a question that that came from a BIPOC fundraiser in Oakland named Jill Kaneshima, that is the current models of governance and leadership are not serving us. Like, what can we do to change this? And when we talk about leadership, I was able to have a conversation with Jill, and it's not just like the leaders in the fundraising or philanthropic sector. It's also looking at how our boards of directors, especially for really large organizations, I can think about my own sector, which is the arts and culture sector, still not a lot of racial parity or diversity there. I think you find a bit more gender parity, not as much intergenerational. So in your opinion, when you think about especially top reparations, like, it takes leadership for these in those institutions to say, we are going to give, what did you call it, radically, to be radical funders. Can you respond to Jill's question around like the issues with leadership and governance in the philanthropic fundraising sector?
Yeah, you know, there's a lot of challenges and opportunities that come to mind when I think about leadership in our sector. You know, obviously we have a long ways to go around parity. When you look at on the foundation side, 90 to 92% of foundation CEOs are white, 90% of boards are white. You know, a lot of philanthropic organizations are family, are not open to non-family members, right? I see that kind of changing over time. And even beyond philanthropy, when we look at other ways that capital is moving through communities, like, you know, 81% of financial services management is white. So even when you think about bank loans and investment in companies, we still have a diversity issue. So diversity absolutely matters. There's a direct correlation between who sits in those seats and where money goes. Like, it just happens. And
can you say that again? Can you just say that again for people? Sure.
There's a direct correlation between who sits in those seats and where money goes because of human nature, right? Like, I think about just in my everyday life, right? If I'm going to get some Girl Scout cookies, right? I'm more likely to, did I cut out? Can you all hear me?
You're good.
Okay, good. When I think about Girl Scout cookies, for example, which I love, I'm more likely to buy them from the little girl that lives in my building that I know and I see and is in my circle versus a random booth on the street somewhere, right? We're just, as humans, we go to where we know and what we are comfortable with. And so that lack of diversity translates into decades and decades of white institutions receiving the vast majority of the funds. So diversity absolutely has to be addressed. Now, because we're centering BIPOC people in this conversation, I want to add this on, if that's okay.
Of course.
For us, for us, Indigenous, Black, Asian, Latinx, all of us people of color, we all have to really be adamant that we are keeping our own leadership in check and have accountability. What you may not know, Nina, because I know you're working your way through the book, as a person who has worked in philanthropy for 16 years, I believe, unless someone proves otherwise, that I may be the only person who has only worked at foundations led by people of color, right? So we're talking that I shared earlier actually happened under the leadership of other people of color, right? All three foundations, there were presidents who were people of color. And you would think, wow, it must be different there. It must have been awesome. It must have been whatever. It actually wasn't. My current foundation is actually pretty cool. Shout out to SHOT Foundation. But in the two places where I started my career, it was actually even more challenging and even more painful to me to feel that oppression, to feel that forced assimilation because of the internalized oppression that existed there with that particular leadership. And so what's really important for us as people of color is that we are holding ourselves accountable and that we're doing our own healing so that we're not internalizing and taking on the oppressive types of leadership that has been modeled for us and that is so rampant and dominant in this sector. We have the opportunity to lead in a very different way. And it takes healing and it takes accountability for us to be able to shed and learn that way of being to actually lead in a way that is much different. That's a struggle that I've had because of forced assimilation and the modeling of leadership that has been put in front of me. I have to hold myself accountable every day because I have a lot of power. I have access to resources. If I don't check myself, I different than the next person who is actually leading in a way that's full of ego and centering themselves versus community. So that's the struggle as we ascend in our leadership, as we ascend into places of power. We cannot take on those columns of being and existing. So that's just something I have. We have a lot of folks who are tuning in, and we're centering this conversation around our communities.
I'm so glad that's actually a beautiful segue into this idea of internalized racial oppression, horizontal oppression, lateral violence. I've been working with a couple organizations, and we've been and consulting work, and it has become so clear to me that in order to dismantle white supremacy, like white supremacy is a thing white folks need to deal with. Like that's not on us. But because we all exist in a system of white supremacy, we each have our own work to do to dismantle that within ourselves. The same way we have to dismantle how patriarchy shows up and misogyny shows up. Misogyny is not something that is specific to men or male presenting people. Misogyny is a byproduct of our society. In your experience, have you come across like you've hinted at, you spoke at a little bit, like for BIPOC folks who have been forced to assimilate? Because I've seen that happen. I've had colleagues where it's like, bruh, like I want to be with you, but like the saying where I'm from is like all skin folk ain't kin folk, right? Like, so what? Right. If somebody is doing that real deep work right now where they're assessing and figuring out, well, if I'm BIPOC and I'm in the system, have I been perpetuating white supremacy? What are some things you think that they could do in order to assess and then maybe counteract that for themselves? What have you seen that has worked, or what have you done yourself?
You know, what I've done is just ensure that I have people around me who will keep it real, right? Because it's so easy when you're in certain positions for people to sort of pander to you and tell you what you want to hear. But I have some dear friends who don't care that I wrote a book, that I will keep it real, and I really appreciate that. And I've also just made a commitment to myself to hold myself accountable. You know, I have at times been in situations where that little voice comes up in my ear that says something crazy, right? And like, I am so intentional about trying to unlearn and decolonize my way of thinking every single day. And I'm like, wow, if that voice is popping up in my ear that's saying like, oh, this person is, you know, might be coming for you, or this person, you know, maybe you shouldn't partner with them because maybe they're smarter than you and they're going to make, you know, take something away, like those scary mindsets. When they pop up, I literally confess. I have a friend that I confess and say, I just need to tell you this crazy thing that popped in my mind. And then I try to go and do exactly the thing that voice was telling me not to do, right? Partner with that person, meet with that person, open up, hire that person that maybe intimidated me or whatever. Those are that's trauma that's real, and trauma that we have to call out and name and just be held accountable. If I don't if I tell someone and allow someone to know that's happening, it would just take over me, where I don't know the truth from a lie, you know, with the voices in my head. The second thing is healing is so important. At Decolonizing Wealth Project, we started holding healing summits. We've done 2 so far, specifically for people of color who work in philanthropy. Because imagine being the only Black person in a foundation after the murder of George Floyd, where you're having to make the case for Black lives while you're personally impacted by everything going on. So we offer that community as a way to not only support, but to have these conversations around, okay, y'all, what really makes us special is that we have culturally, we have cultural wisdom, ancestral wisdom to lead in a different way. We have to like be in these spaces to heal in caucus, right? Where we're doing our work not under the white gaze, and we're creating those opportunities to be accountable to each other. We're also going to do this for fundraisers on June 26th, which I think if that's the Saturday, that's the right date. We're holding a healing summit for BIPOC fundraisers to come together, to not have an agenda around anything, but to be together. We're bringing in Indigenous, Black, and other people of color healers to just hold space with us. So I'm committed to my own healing and to, you know, to be intentional and accountable, but also to actually do that healing work, kind of where we started, Nina, talking about the spiritual and the emotional, right? It's so attached from that, and to become just in our head around how we do our work, our theories of change, the fundraising cycle, you know, the process for doing this, that, and the third, that we lose sight of that spiritual guidance and those whispers from our ancestors that are actually pushing us forward in a way that may not fit into the dominant way of being and existing. So those are the spaces where I'm trying to hold myself accountable, because it really is hard, right? Because we are rewarded for assimilated. We get promotions when we are not outliers and we are like everyone else. But being like everyone else is not serving us or our communities well, and ultimately is not serving our institutions well if we really want to, you know, be anti-racist in how we show up in community.
And it also goes against the net, like biodiversity is a thing, right? Like we different organisms and like multifaceted like beings coexist to support one another. And I did see, I want to shout out Catherine Merlot for putting the link to your Heal With Us Summit in the chat, because Lizzie did ask, how do we get involved? Invited to the June 26th summit. So be sure to, Catherine just put the link in the summit, to the summit in the chat. And I want to make sure we do have time for questions. This has been so awesome and so amazing to chat with you. And I think one more selfish question that I have is, again, thinking about solidarity across BIPOC folks, that idea where we harm one another because of how white supremacy shows up in us and in our culture. And also white folks get harmed, right? Like there's this great, like TikTok has been teaching me so much. Like I'm a millennial who loves TikTok, and there was this amazing Black creator who made this beautiful point that because of what white supremacy does, light-skinned and white folks who have like cultural ties have been told to cut that off. Like if you think back to like the early 1900s, if you were Irish or Italian, or like you weren't considered white, right? It wasn't until they were trying to suppress the Black vote that they were like, hey, buddy, you should be white because then you get all these privileges. So
Mhm.
like white supremacy doesn't just negatively impact us who are more melanated, it impacts all of us. But when I think about the healing, you've used that H word, and I'm so glad you brought it up, because learning to heal is going to be, I think, one of the best ways that we get through. And people can, you know, you can say it's woo woo, that it's out there, whatever, but it's true. Like if you are not in therapy right now or have somebody to talk to, I feel for you. So when you think about how different folks of color can heal together, I think of like the breakdown between Indigenous and Black folks, right? There's been so much that has pitted us against one another. When I think about the insurgence of violence against our Asian and API brothers and sisters that are out there right now, like, what do you think outside of the gaze of whiteness? What do you think we can do, or what is your opinion about how do we heal together?
Yeah, you know, it's that I love that question. I mean, we first, you know, we have to always name anti-Black racism. Like we have to just name it. We have to center that in all of our work. And if you're a person of color, you're having a hard time your head around that, there's work for you to do. And so that's one thing that's real. And then, you know, I think it's getting to a place where I just try to build a shield around my solidarity, right? You know, I remember during the pandemic, Native American communities, we had a moment where we were getting a lot of attention from the media and philanthropy, because after a lot of organizing and work, we finally got the media to cover what was happening in the Navajo tribe, right? And how our communities were just being hammered by the pandemic. And when that happened and we got the attention, finally, dollars started coming in to support those communities. And, you know, for a moment, we're like, wow, we feel seen. We're like, you know, in my Indigenous advisory group, we were working on a statement like, you know, this is what philanthropy should do. And like, while we had the attention, in the middle of writing the statement, the murder of George Floyd happened. And so we had to have a conversation like, do we still put the statement out? Like, we don't want to take away. Yeah. And there was this shift, you know, from focusing on that to Black-led organizing, the movement for Black lives and all of that. When I tell you I had numerous funders to say to me, basically try to pit us against what was happening, right? To say, oh, how do you feel about the attention shifting? How do you feel about funders now? And I said, what you're not going to do is try to pit us against the Black community. We are in deep, deep solidarity. So we, you know, and everything that I did at that point, I just really tried to be intentional about naming that solidarity in everything that I do, because I, you know, fundamentally know and understand that our liberation is mutually connected and tied into each other. And so what causes that is white supremacy, right? I don't ever get mad at another person of color when, you know, because of my healing, I've been able to love those who try to oppress me, because I know it's not their fault. It is actually the fault of white supremacy. And so I am committed to that solidarity. I'm committed to Black lives, regardless of what's going on, because I'm not going to feed into that. And what I want to say for a moment to white relatives watching this, I so appreciate your point, Nina, that, you know, even for white folks, this solidarity is so critical and important, because white supremacy is not just harming our communities, it's harming your community, it's hurting your family. This ideology that was created, that is this false ideology that we have all internalized at some level, is just tearing us all apart. And what we're trying to do as people of color who are fundraising is not beg for your resources to support poor Black people or poor Native people or poor Asian folks over here. What we're actually doing is extending a lifeline into your humanity, into inviting you to be a part of this healing process. And so that's why it's so important, you know, even for white folks to understand your role in this. Like, we are doing our healing over here, we're building our solidarity, but we can only get so far until you do your work. And that work should happen in caucus, and there's times that it should happen in community with us in solidarity. So that's an invitation for everybody, because this is, I mean, I've had enough. I'm so tired of this mess. I am ready to get to a different place of healing and deeper solidarity, which I feel like is possible more now after this like heightened awareness with this collective grieving and all the death that we've all seen and experienced. Like, I hope that people are here for it now. If you haven't been here for it, to just pull up to the table, examine your own shit, and figure out what you got to do to heal. If we can heal ourselves, then we're going to be ready to heal others. I couldn't be up here sharing medicine until I did my own work. I had to go into a deep place, sit with my elders and figure my stuff out before I can get into a place to be able to be open to connect and build. And so that's the invitation today. If you don't know where to start, pull up that mirror and just start with yourself, start with your family. About fundraising. This is not just about how to get another dollar for your organization. This is about true personal transformation. And we should be talking about this at home, at the dinner table, in your faith community, at your book club, wherever you go. Because when we get this in our spirits, when we get it in our hearts, when we get this in our emotions, we're going to just start showing up at work and doing the right thing. You'll know what to do. You won't need a checklist because it's going to become a part of who you are.
Edgar, I said at the beginning, stop flirting with me. You're in a committed relationship. God. Well, yes, healing, self-work, sitting in the discomfort of looking at yourself in the mirror. Like, that's been my big work of 2020, is resting in all of this discomfort of my physical self, spiritual, emotional. Thank you for sharing, thank you for taking time out your day to spit some knowledge, spit some game on us. We are at the point where I want to dive into some of these questions. Just thank you so much for your kindness and your candor. And in our conversation, I've heard you say it, by no means are you saying you are the model that for either of us. Like, I mess up and cause harm all the time. I am a cisgendered, able-bodied Black woman. Yes, I have my points of oppression, but I will always cause harm to other folks for who I exhibit more privilege. And it is knowing that, and you as a cisgendered man, light-skinned Native American man, also have privilege, and you will cause harm because of the system we live in. But not letting that keep you from the healing is the lesson that I'm taking away from today. So thank you for sharing that. I feel jazzed. The sunshine's still coming in. All right, let's get to some of these questions. So I'm going to go over to, there's a lot of activity again in the chat. Thank you all. Please use it to communicate with one another. And so, I'm going to go over to the Q&A, and I'm just going to go to, so the one that's gotten the 27 upvotes, it says, for Edgar, how do we acknowledge the shoring up of wealth in DAFs? A recent Chronicle of Philanthropy article that 300 billion in capital have been stored in DAFs over the past 5 years.
Mm-hmm. This is a great question, because you said earlier, Nina, about philanthropic capital being blood money. I often say that it's money that's been twice stolen. It was stolen, extracted from communities, right, through slave labor, genocide, land grabbing, and it's now money that's escaping taxation, right, and money that would go into the public system to pay for healthcare and all the other safety supports, public education, that we need in communities. And so this is the new way that folks with wealth, many folks are in a sense, a third wave of hoarding and hiding and keeping resources from the communities. People are starting donor advised funds, and most of you probably know, but if you don't know, in most cases, donor advised funds are charitable bank accounts that you can open. You get immediate tax write-off on everything you put in there, and there's actually zero payout requirement. So all of this capital is going institutions like banks, like Fidelity Charitable, for example, with no requirement that those funds ever see the light of day or have any public benefit. This is a really, there's a lot of a major point of contention around DAFs right now. I read an article, I think last year, maybe it was 2 years ago, that said that donor advised funds were a monument of white supremacy that must come down. And when I tell you that article calls probably more of a conversation than anything I've ever done, because there's a lot going on when we think about DAFs, right? Community foundations, banks, they love DAFs, right? They love to receive the money. Now, there's some great efforts out there. Many community foundations and organizations are really pushing for a payout. But the only way we're going to get to a place where we have any equity there to ensure that there's public benefit to those dollars is that we actually need legislation and a requirement by the federal government that these funds are paid out. There was one effort in California where they tried to have a mandatory payout on donor advised funds. People organized and shot that down, including fundraisers who did not want to see that happen. Including folks who work in philanthropy who did not want that requirement out of a fear that by imposing those restrictions, people might give less. This is where we are upside down in our values. We are centering donors. We're centering the idea of getting money and hoarding resources over community that needs those resources. If anyone is getting a charitable write-off for a contribution, there should be some type of demonstrated public benefit to those resources, right? Otherwise, pay your taxes. Otherwise, pay your taxes because these resources are needed in community right now. So I think what is required of us is that we all need to put pressure. We need to organize on financial institutions to do a better job on pushing donors to pay those dollars out. We also need to look at advocacy and policy efforts that are underway nationally to actually put restrictions on payout requirements or mandate payout requirements on donor advised funds. That's what needs to happen, in my opinion.
Thank you. The next one, which got 21 upvotes from folks, and that I should note that the question you just asked came from Hong Chuar, CFRE, he, him pronouns. So Hong, thank you for that. The next one is anonymous. For Edgar, can you talk about how you're reconciling and owning your own complicity in the system of for so many years? What is your response to that, if you have one?
You know, this is what I believe about my own life and about all of us. I am a person that believes that we can all learn, we can all grow, and I believe in grace and I believe in forgiveness. And I think part of the challenge, I'll never forget when I left North Carolina and I moved to Seattle, a conservative bubble, right? And I remember meeting people in Seattle who made so many assumptions about me just because I had a Southern accent, right? Just because I was coming from North Carolina. And, you know, and I've shared my story before because I actually think it's really important to know. And I like to push back on our self-righteousness sometimes as people who are enlightened or progressive. I was raised in a right-wing evangelical family. My family are Trumpsters. I was raised to be sexist, homophobic, and racist. And there was a point in my life where I, probably, I went to a Pentecostal seminary, and I probably believed that half of the people on this call were going straight to hell. I mean, I believe that just as fervently as I believe what I'm saying now. So how do I get from that place to this place? It came from my own learning, my own work to politicize myself and to get my own understanding outside of what I was taught. So, right, unlearning and relearning. And it also came about from many, many teachers and people who had grace with me to sit down and to explain and to bring me around. And then it also came about from my own experience with injustice, right? When I began to feel that oppression, it shifted me to wake up to say, oh, I'm not a part of that group over here. I'm definitely a part of the other, a group that's marginalized. So I share all that. There's a bigger story there, but to share that people can evolve and grow and change. And I think right now, when we're living in this moment of identity politics and cancel culture, it's so easy to write people off, right? And I'm not saying that we should tolerate anyone who is actively harming us, right? There's a time to fight, right? But we also must extend grace. And I ask myself all the time when I'm in situations, what if today was the first day that somebody was joining this movement? Do I have the patience and the grace to allow them to sit at this table and to have some time to learn without having to use all the right words or show up in all the right ways. We have to have some level of grace. If we are right, if we're on the right side of this thing, the right side of justice, and we want others to join our movement, we have to believe that people can change and that and have some level of grace and understanding for them. So that's the same grace that I extend to myself and the same grace that I extend to others. So that's how I'm reconciling all of it. And I'm doubling down and working harder for the rest of my life. Now that I know better, as Maya Angelou said, I'm going to do better.
Because it is life work. Like, this is not, Seattle, like you said, is a liberal, but I'm from Cincinnati, Ohio. It is one of the racist, most segregated cities. Somebody in the chat asked what part of Alabama. My family's from Athens, Alabama. You from North Carolina. At least there, you know racism when you see it because it's in your face. Right. Like on this side of the country, because it's not old school racism, it's that new bullshit. Pardon my French. It is like you don't know, and it hides itself in really weird ways. So I appreciate you saying that it is life work, and you have to extend grace to others and to yourself, because that healing starts here. And I know we're getting hot on time, so there are going to be like 2 more questions that I'm going to ask you. So the next one comes from Elizabeth Ralston, who I have to give a huge shout out. Elizabeth is the founder of the Seattle Cultural Accessibility Consortium. She and her team are providing accessibility training and trying to get people, as we talk about equity, to also discuss access, right? Because just because you are an inclusive organization does not mean you're accessible. So Elizabeth's question says, we talk a lot about DEI efforts. Where do we see the role of accessibility for people with disabilities? How is it possible to work towards equity and inclusion when access is not considered?
You know, I'm so glad this question was raised, because this is, this feels like a, I'm trying to think of the right word, but in this moment, the disability rights movement, people with disabilities are really organizing and doing some fantastic work to push on all of us, right? And so I just say, keep up that work, and let's get in solidarity with each other, right? We're stronger in numbers to make sure that what people want and need is provided, right? And especially for people of color. So I lead with a race lens all the time in everything that I do. And so I just want to say that, because I have been asked before, what about gender? What about, other areas of marginalization? I'm here for all of it. I'm here in deep solidarity. I lead with race because we know, regardless of the group we're talking about, whether it's queer folks or people with disabilities or women, when we bring that lens of race, the disparities are exacerbated. So I'm going for, I kind of just lead with race. But I think there's some fantastic work happening. The Ford Foundation is funding some stuff. I've been kind of watching and talking with some folks over there to understand how I can be a better ally and co-conspirator to advocate for increased access. Access is power, and it needs to be equally shared and redistributed, right, for all people.
Thank you. And also, it's about educating yourself. If you are in the Seattle area, King County area, look up the work that the Seattle Cultural Accessibility Consortium is doing. Just like you have to lead with race, when you add a lens of accessibility to that, you have to educate yourself. Again, able-bodied, younger person that doesn't have any invisible disabilities, no visible disabilities, I'm going to benefit from the way the world is set up for me as much as I can, also moving through the world as a plus size Black woman. So educate yourself, know how your privilege can support others that have less. And yes, leading with the lens of race is important, because it's the first thing people see about you. And if you say you don't see color, you need to go to a doctor, because that's a different issue. Edgar, this has been amazing. I have been in delight. Hopefully I've kept you awake and popping during this time.
Oh yeah.
And so the last question, like I said, we start and we end with a question from a person of color. So I will be that person. And my question for you is, we always do this at CD Forum. What is giving you joy right now? There's so much sorrow and grief. Like what is filling your cup?
I really appreciate that question because I've actually been grieving a lot in the past month, just through a lot of transitions I'm experiencing in my life. So I have been really intentional every single day to do one thing that brings me joy. This sounds like really, really very surface level, but when you're definitely in the midst of grieving, you got to do what you can. Like I think it's a decision that I make every day. I'm going to do at least one thing that brings me joy. So I just moved to a new apartment, and not too far from here is sort of a kitchen store, and I think I like to think of myself as a bit of a cook. And so I went to the kitchen store yesterday and I bought myself like a really nice set of bowls that were more than I normally would want to pay. But I was like, you know what? Today I need these bowls. I need these bowls. They are going to make me feel good, and I'm going to put them in my kitchen. I'm going to be inspired to start cooking, and so that is such a small thing, but I want to say more broadly what I'm inspired by every single day is actually being in spaces like this. And I know that sounds like a Hallmark card, and AFP is not, asking me to give any endorsement here, but I am so, I received so much healing and sort of sharing this medicine with you all and receiving the medicine back from these conversations that I get to have every single day, because it's pushing us one step closer to the future of what I know we can be as a community and as a people. So when I get off of these conversations, like any problem that I have, it's gone. I'm like, yeah, I'm really high off of it. So that's knowing that these conversations are happening all over the country. Like I'm talking to a lot of people, y'all, and all around the world. It gives me hope that despite the headlines in the paper and everything that we're reading, that there is a huge swath of our community that is in deep solidarity, that's coming together, that's fighting, that's pushing. And I know that, they're on the other side of this horrible year and a half we've been experiencing. There's going to be joy and more joy. We will dance in the streets of New York City. I will be back in Seattle, eating at all my favorite places there and hanging out at Lake Washington. And we're going to get there. So I'm inspired by that. I see the sun peeking through your window. I've got some sun peeking through here in New York City. So all of this is just bathing me with love and joy.
Awesome. And real quick, if people want to find out more about Decolonizing Wealth or get your book or just learn more about Liberated Capital, what do they need to do to find you?
It's all on decolonizingwealth.com.
Awesome. Well, Edgar, it has been a joy and a pleasure. I hope your day is peaceful and radiant and filled with yummy food and something good to drink. This has been a real joy for me. So I want to say thank you again.
Thank you, Nina, and thanks everyone for having me.
Yeah, thanks, AFP. We're gonna cut off our stuff, and Lauren, welcome back.
Yes. Thank you so much, Edgar and Nina, for that wonderful conversation. I'm definitely looking forward to dancing in the streets with you, Edgar. I'm coming to New York to do that.
Yes.
And thank you to everyone who participated in the Q&A. We're going to take a 15-minute break now, and we'll be back. Well, I guess it's a little less than 15 minutes, about a 10-minute break, and we'll be back at 10:30. And we'll get started with session 1, A Legacy with Impact, applying a social and racial justice framework to estate planning with Elena Pullen-Venema, Director of Gift Planning for the Community Foundation of Snohomish County. To send us to our break, I'd like to welcome Stephen from Bloomerang, our tech sponsor. Welcome, Stephen. Thank you, Stephen. Now, during our break, you have a choice to stay in the conference space and keep networking, or turn off your camera and mic and take a break away from your screen. This is a great time to keep working on your Meet Someone Who card. There are a few tables throughout the floors marked as quiet table if you would like to fully step away from the networking. Don't forget to check out the sponsor banners and visit our sponsor tables on floors 1 and 2. One more reminder, if you need any assistance, please visit our tech helpers at the help desk or send a private message to AFP Advancement Northwest through Remo's chat feature. We'll see you in about 10 minutes.